Chapter 2. Lubarth had laid the groundwork for her new identity long before her creation at the cloning facility at Farpoint. Kayla knew the blind old man had a talent for predicting the future, but had no idea how far-reaching his foresight was. Even after his death, his instructions, recorded years in advance, were still being sent. Every move he made was like that of a weaver at a loom, and every instruction the single pass of the shuttle forever altering the very tapestry of us. Yet his predictions were not flawless. With his death, he would no longer be able to make amendments to his plans. In time more and more errors would creep in, rendering his intentions meaningless. Would those loyal to his word still follow long after the course he'd set had fallen into chaos? She felt as if she'd been thrown into the center of it all. She knew he had his reasons for giving her this role, but Kayla wasn't sure how to feel about it. While there were certainly benefits to being regarded with reverence and fear, it didn't sit well with her. There were people who felt like they were obligated to follow her instructions, and Shinji was one of them. Kayla pouted. "What's wrong?" Shinji asked as they rounded a corner. "Did you come in to keep me company because you wanted to, or because I wanted you to?" "Both." "Why?" he asked as they approached an office door. "Ask again later," Kayla sighed. He knocked on the door. Her eyes narrowed as she watched telepathic energies flowing between Shinji and someone on the other side of the door. She wondered if it would be possible to slip into the stream of thought and listen into their private conversation. Shinji glanced over at her and did a double take. "What?" Kayla asked. "I could have sworn you had blue eyes." "They're green, with blue around the center. I guess they looked bluer before you pushed your white streak of hair to one side." The door buzzed. He pushed the door open. "After you." As she stepped into the room, everyone stood up behind their desks. They were all chamfar. He stepped inside and closed the door behind himself. "Is that really her?" a young woman asked from behind a nearby desk. "She's so." One of the men completed her sentence with the word young, while another inserted the word cute. "Cute," Shinji scoffed, "she's gorgeous." The female chamfar glared at Shinji and said, "Ordinary." Shinji laughed heartily. "I don't even think that's really her," the woman scoffed. "Are you sure you didn't make a mistake?" The jealousy flowing out of the woman was palpable. "We're all telepathic," Shinji said with a crooked grin. "Ask her yourself." "What's your name?" the woman asked. Kayla shook her head and rolled her eyes. "Are you really so petty that you'd word the question that poorly? You know how truth detection works. It's all in the question. You know full well that Lady Darkseid isn't actually my birth name. It's what I am called by others. Are you being ignorant or dishonest?" The woman nearly leapt out of her seat and stomped over toward her. Kayla raised an eyebrow and smiled in amusement. "You don't look that impressive to me," the woman snapped. "If I decided to smack you, what do you think you could do about it?" Kayla's tails repositioned themselves under her skirt. Of all the mystic arts, the three which were most prominent were the telepathic abilities of psionics, the elemental manipulation of mystrionics, and the physical discipline known as kobitange. Kayla's unique visual acuity enabled her to see the subtle flow of energies which indicated the use of each of these talents. Her tails had responded to the woman's secondary ability before she'd consciously noticed the subtle hints of red within the blue energy flow of her psionic abilities, indicating a weak talent for kobitange. "Feel free to try," Kayla goaded. "Please," one of the men urged, "let's all just calm down and get back to work. If management finds out about this, we'll all be written up." Kayla glanced over toward the speaker. The woman swung at her, hoping to take advantage of the momentary distraction. Kayla's tail struck out from beneath her skirt. One of her brown tails wrapped around the woman's legs as the other grabbed her by the neck and pulled her crashing down to the floor. They sped back under Kayla's skirt and coiled slowly back around her legs. "What just happened?" the other of the two men asked in surprise. Was that telekinesis? Shinji smiled, knowingly. I didn't see anything. The woman looked up at her in horror. What was that? I felt them touch me. What are you? Me? Kayla mocked. I'm ordinary. Well, truth detection works just fine on her, the bulkier of the two Shamfarians said with a grin. Sure does, the slim Shamfarian said. That was a lie if I've ever heard one. Okay, Lady Darkseid. If you'll please step over here so we can set you up with your new ID chip. The woman dusted herself off and scampered back behind her desk. Kayla walked over and sat next to the smaller of the two men. Okay, Lady Darkseid, he said nervously as he took out a small device that looked like a miniature gun. Where would you like the chip positioned? Kayla unbuckled the strap at the bottom of her right sleeve and folded back her armor. She pointed to a spot on her wrist and smiled. I'm going to have to ask you to remove your glove, the man said. Shinji stifled a laugh. But I'm not wearing any gloves, Kayla said with feigned confusion. The Shamfarian touched her hand cautiously, my mistake. He held the insertion device against her wrist and pulled the trigger. It cut a small slit in her arm as the chip was inserted. It should heal up, the man began to say as Kayla's Kobe-Tom's regeneration sealed the wound. Never mind. Enjoy your stay. Great, Kayla said with a big smile as she stood up and sauntered back over to Shinji. So, where will you be escorting me next? That's all, Shinji said. You're done here. She flashed a reproachful glance in the direction of the young woman as she took hold of Shinji's hand and led him toward the door. That's not acceptable. I'm not done with you, Kayla said as they passed through the door. Once the door closed, Kayla released his hand. What was that about? Kayla asked. Who are you to her? We went on a date a while back, he said. Ever since then. Kayla saw a faint trail of telepathic energy flowing through the door toward him. He sighed deeply as he received the telepathic message. Akane's been obsessed with me ever since, he grumbled. She's chased off anyone that shows any interest in me and... She watched another message pass to him. She'll probably make up some story to get me written up again, after what just happened. She could sense that he was telling the truth. Kayla watched another wispy stream of blue energy passing through the door. Excuse me, Kayla said as she reached into the thought stream with her mind. I don't care who she thinks she is, the woman was thinking to Shinji. I'll break her legs if she thinks. If I think what? Kayla thought forcefully, forming a temporary link with both of their minds. Shinji muttered, I've never heard of anyone. Kayla grinned mischievously. He's mine. Back off, bitch, the woman thought angrily. Akane, please, just stop, Shinji thought. I will not. She can't have you, Akane thought. Please tell me you didn't sleep with her, Kayla thought with disgust. No, he responded with a sense of urgency, we just caught a movie and went out for drinks. He was telling the truth. We got further than that in the decon stall earlier, Kayla thought mockingly. The statement was vague enough to register as true and leave the woman to her own assumptions. Akane began mentally screeching and cursing at them over the link. I don't suppose you'd mind if I kill her, Kayla thought irritably. Only a fool would interfere with the whims of Lady Darkseid, Shinji thought as he covered his mouth and laughed softly. Kayla withdrew her mind, severing the connection. Reinforce your mental shield and shut her out. If I do that, she really will report me. Seriously? It wouldn't be the first time. Take me to your supervisor, Kayla said sternly. Why? He said nervously. Kayla tilted her head upward, and said, I have a complaint to file. Yes, Lady Darkseid, he said nervously, as a faint smile wavered at the corner of his lip. Shinji led her through the large atrium that had once been the lounge area, where people waited for their families. The old faction offices, lining the area, had all been closed. The signs identifying each office had been left completely intact, and you could still peer through the windows, but the doorways had been bricked shut. They could have renovated and rented out the offices, but instead the Alliance had chosen to send a message. On Hyrule, they had sealed themselves off from unwanted influences, but acknowledged that the threat still remained. As they walked through the former receiving area, Kayla stopped next to a rusty, circular stain on the tiled floor. Shinji stopped and turned to face her. "Is something wrong?" "No," Kayla said with a smile as she took one last long look at the place where a trash barrel had once stood. "Just a memory." "Is it a good one?" he asked. He was trying to keep the mood light but seemed worried. "It's hard to say," Kayla mused. "This is where my journey really began, right on this spot. All I had to do was reach out my hand and take hold of a crumpled piece of paper." He watched her in silence. She reached out her open hand and closed it as if she were grabbing something tight. Then she smiled and added, "That's all it took to change my life, forever." He looked curious and a bit confused. "It seems so long ago," Kayla reminisced. "I was a different person then." A long slow sigh escaped her lips. Shinji was looking at her strangely. "What?" Kayla asked as she stepped toward him. "Let's go." "Are you crying?" he asked just above a whisper. She hadn't even realized that the memory of simpler times had affected her so deeply. She blinked and wiped her eyes before the first tear could escape. "I'll be fine," Kayla said with a warm smile. "If you're sure," he said, and waited for her to respond. Kayla nodded slowly. Without saying another word, he escorted her to the administrative office, through the entrance, and up to an ornate door with purple and gold accents. "This is it," he sounded stressed as he knocked on the door. Kayla smiled at the sound of someone grumbling from beyond the door. The sound continued until the door opened. An elderly Shamfarian stood in the doorway eyeing her with suspicion. He was wearing a long purple robe with gold accents. "Sir," Shinji said as he bowed. "The lady would like to speak with you." "Who are you?" the man snapped angrily. "I'm Lady Darkseid," Kayla said with a smile. The old man stepped back and bowed low before her. "Please excuse my rudeness. I meant no disrespect." "What is your name?" Kayla. "Kato," he answered as he straightened. "One of your people attempted to strike me," Kayla said indignantly. The man gasped with an exaggerated expression of shock. "Were they aware of who you are, at the time?" "They certainly were," Kayla said adamantly. "Who dared to show such disrespect?" Kato said as he turned his attention to Shinji. "Akane," Shinji answered softly. "She will be disciplined," Kato said firmly. "Is there anything I can do for you to make up for this grave transgression?" "Actually," Kayla said with exaggerated thoughtfulness, "now that you mention it, there is one thing that comes to mind." "Anything for you," Kato said emphatically, "Lady Darkseid. I assure you, the Shadow Brigade will do anything in our power to assist you during your visit to Hyrule." She flashed Shinji a quick smile before continuing. "This young man has been very helpful since my arrival. I'd like for him to be assigned as my personal escort during my stay." Shinji gaped at her. "He's not suited as a guard," Kato insisted. "There are others far better suited." "I don't need a guard," Kayla scoffed. "What I need is a guide. Someone to drive me around and show me the sights." "I hope you can drive." Kayla thought to Shinji, realizing she hadn't thought to ask. "Of course," he replied with amusement. Kayla watched telepathic messages pass between Shinji and Kato for a moment before the old man spoke again. "Of course, Lady Darkseid. We will reassign him to your personal detail while you're here. Thank you, Kayla said with an appreciative smile. Wonderful, Kato said and then added. I really should ask, how long are you planning to be visiting us? Only 1 or 2. Kayla spoke slowly and thoughtfully as she monitored the old man's emotional response. Years. Years, Kato said with a start. You want him assigned to you for 1 or 2 years? Don't worry, Kayla said dismissively. I'll return him to your service once I'm done with him. The elderly man clearly wasn't comfortable with the duration of her request but was afraid to offend her. He seems like a bright young man who could use additional training, Kayla said insistently. I promise to return him in better condition than I found him in. A series of telepathic messages passed quickly between the two men. Kayla pretended not to notice while fighting the impulse to listen in. It didn't take long for her patience to reach its limit. She reached out into the thought stream. What does she think she can teach you that we can't? The old man's thoughts were full of anger. Is there a problem? Kayla's thoughts flowed into the stream. No, ma'am, Shinji thought in response. How did? The old man began to think in surprise, then redirected. Of course not, Lady Darkseid. If you even consider taking advantage of her, the old man thought angrily, I'll have your head. I'm still listening, Kayla scolded him. The old man lowered his head in shame as Kayla withdrew from the thought stream. Well, don't stand there like a buffoon, Kato snapped at Shinji. Don't keep the lady waiting. Shinji smiled with exaggerated embarrassment. Lady Darkseid, please come with me. Kayla's warm smile was slowly replaced by a mischievous grin as they headed out of the office and continued toward the street entrance to Port Liberty. I'll go bring a car around, Shinji said. Please wait by the doors. Kayla nodded quietly. After he left, she looked around the old reception area. She remembered the strange package that Vorshana had left behind to help draw Kayla into their plans, and Vance's enthusiasm when he first felt her drawing near. I loved him so much, Kayla mused, and then realized she'd spoken of him in past tense. She looked over at the mismatched floor tiles where the defense satellite had blown a hole through the station, all so Thelkar could fake his own death. Vance had consoled her after she'd felt the deaths of the people who'd been caught in the blast. She was so emotionally weak back then, and he was so gentle. Kayla smiled at the memory, but her mood darkened as she remembered how she had felt when he'd rejected her just a few days later. That was the first time he had rejected her. The last was while she was back on Midguard. The person she was today had been forged through unifying the two souls which had been within her when she'd last been here. It was her namesake, Kayla, which had been rejected first, and her second self, Kivaza, the second time. Each half had been incomplete without the other, yet their current union was still flawed. She lowered her head and fought back a torrent of conflicting emotions. The original Kayla had loved Vance so deeply, so desperately, but why? She'd been his protector prior to being sent to PRI, and he resented her for it. He could be so kind in one moment and so cruel the next, yet she'd never questioned his love. In some ways, he seemed more like Kivaza's ancient brother, Edik, than she was willing to admit. She sighed deeply. In 2 separate lifetimes Kivaza had been a shadowy soul lurking within the mind of another. This life it was Kayla, but long before that she'd been the second soul of the ancient princess of Eldaron, Veshtaka. It was Veshtaka's vulnerability that Edik had loved and desired. Was it the same with her brother and Kayla in this lifetime? Was this all part of the ever-repeating cycle Sadakar had spoken of? The union of the two souls within her felt strained. For a split second, while they were together in the stall, Shinji had seen a fleeting glimpse of the ancient part of her that had always dwelt within the shadows. Unlike Vance and Edik, he didn't look away. She smiled and blushed as her thoughts turned to Shinji. He was different, and she liked it. For a long time, Vance had been the only man in her life. Was it as simple as that? He was simply there. Had their love been nothing more than familiarity born of circumstance, or fate seeking to bend them to its will? Fate, Kayla scoffed, it's just the insane calculations of fools that have confused nursery rhymes with prophecies and endeavor to forge their interpretations into truth. Am I just a puppet dancing on invisible strings? Kayla said with a sigh. She tried to shake the mood before it could damage the unity between the two halves of her soul. It would be over 2 years before the planet Midguard would return to its ancient home, shining bright in the skies of Hyrule. Her brother, possessed by an ancient parasite, would return with it. Whether by salvation or damnation, they had to be stopped. I'll choose my own destiny from this point forward, Kayla pledged to herself. I will defeat Corrin, she whispered, but I will not do it for his sake, but for my own. This cycle needs to be broken, and I won't be fully free of it until then. A faint smile crept across her face as she saw a car pull up in front of the doors. She rushed outside and got into the car. Where would you like to go first? Shinji asked. Tomorrow, Kayla said with a laugh. I've spent enough time with yesterday. He looked at her with confusion. Just amusing myself, she said with a smile. I should really check in at Gistajo's. But, before I do that, I should really consider getting some armor that suits my new look. I know just the place. Head to the entrance of Blade's Edge, and I'll give you directions from there. I really hope her shop is still open. I doubt it's there anymore. Blade's Edge just isn't what it used to be. What was the name of the shop? Shinji asked. I don't remember, Kayla chuckled. Last time I was there was right after a car crash. It's owned by a woman named Bruja. I think I know the place, he said with a broad smile. They moved into the city a while back, he said. They're called Alliance Arms now. Kayla watched him for a moment. Why are you smiling? He flushed. Are you going to tell me, or do I have to pull the answer out of your brain? Sorry, he said as he cleared his throat. I was just wondering if you'll let me watch them size you for your new suit. Or in other words, you're just hoping to see me naked again? Shinji looked at her sheepishly. Maybe. His answer felt elusive, indicating a more positive answer than he was willing to give her. I might be able to arrange that, Kayla giggled. She quickly covered her mouth to stifle the sound. Wow, he teased, Lady Darkseid giggles. Just drive, Kayla said while trying to sound annoyed, but she couldn't hide her amusement.